Hey guys, back here at the Joshi Pod, and super excited to have on Farrah Hasnain, a writer and researcher currently living in Osaka, soon to be Tokyo. She's got a wrestling presence online. That's how I met her, through Twitter, and very excited to have her on the show. Welcome to the show, Farrah.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you because this is the first time we've actually spoken, and we've only chatted through Twitter DMs and through tweets and things like that. So it's neat. It's nice to put a voice with a tweet.
Yeah.
So I like to have my friends on, and Jay. I always like to rub it into Jay that he's not my friend, but I like to have my friends on, and you're now my friend since you're on the show, so you're officially a friend now.
Sweet.
So let's talk about how you ended up first. Before we get to the wrestling stuff, let's talk about how you ended up in Japan. Can you kind of let us know how you ended up? You're living the dream that most of us are wanting to live.
Oh yeah, I'm living my dreams too. Like I've always wanted to live in Japan since I was like 8 years old. So ever since I was 8 years old, I've been really into like anime. So the first time I even heard of Japanese language was from this anime called Sailor Moon.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, like, I watched it in English on TV, but I remember one day I rented a DVD at Hollywood Video, back when there was Hollywood Video. And, I put in the DVD and I guess the person who had it before me had it in Japanese with English subtitles. And I heard the theme song Moonlight Desetsu for the first time. And I thought, wow, this is such a beautiful language. What is this moon language? And I find out it was Japanese. And I always wanted to learn it, but the problem was I lived in a very poor part of the DC area, so we didn't have that many opportunities to learn different like language classes. So Japanese wasn't offered. So I took French for 4 years in high school. And I had to wait until university before I could actually properly study Japanese. And the first time I visited Japan was when I was 17 years old in 2009. And my high school partnered with this tour company. It just so happened that the summer before my senior year of high school, they took us to Japan for 2 weeks. And before that, I honestly wasn't very inclined to learn Japanese because everything, had English subtitles in it. Like, I felt like I just liked listening to it. And I was very intimidated by learning other languages. I mean, English is my second language, but still, it's very hard to learn Japanese, especially with the kanji. That's kind of intimidating, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when I visited Japan, everyone was super nice to me, and I had a lot of fun, but I felt like there was a missing element to it. Like, I couldn't interact with the locals, and I could understand some of what people were saying around me, but I couldn't respond, and I needed to work on my output. So how I ended up in Japan. So exactly 7 years ago today, as my Japan anniversary, I moved to Japan through the JET program. And JET program is the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program. And I taught English at a public high school in Hamamatsu, Shizuoka for about 5 years. And then...
well, hold on. Let's stop right there.
Okay.
Let's talk about that experience, about teaching.
Yeah.
Teaching, because I mean, a lot of the people, even myself, I've always thought about, maybe I can go teach in Japan. That's my foot in the door there,
Right.
What's that experience like to teach over in Japan?
It's a very interesting experience, especially if you have teaching experience from your home country. I was shocked by a lot of things because I used to teach at a school in DC and things were kind of different. So I worked at a public high school, and I think one of the things I immediately noticed was how strict the dress code was. Because obviously, like in anime, you see like quirky, like colorful hair on people and short skirts, but in Japanese schools, they literally measure like the length of your skirt. It's kind of like a Catholic school in a way. And you can't dye your hair, you can't have piercings, and if you get a piercing or anything, at least in the school I worked at, you would get in a lot of trouble. But another thing I noticed was that the teachers and the students were very close. So I don't know about where you live, but when I lived in DC and when I went to public school anyway, the teacher's lounge was forbidden. Like, students couldn't enter, right?
Yeah.
But in Japan, we have the staff room, and students can come and go as they please. And I was so shocked by that. I was like, why are all these students coming here? And the high schools especially, we have this thing called bukatsu. Bukatsu is like club activities, and high school students are required to do it after school. And I was impressed because they have a wide array of club activities that not every public school could have in the US. But even though my school was in a poorer area of Hamamatsu, like we still had everything. We had art club. We have a top dance team that would perform in LA. Like we had a lot of stuff. And I was the supervisor for my high school's dance team actually, for a good amount of years. And I got really close to the kids because I had to work with them after school as well. So the dynamic between student and teacher and senpai and kohai was stronger than I imagined. I think that's what shocked me the most.
How did the other teachers treat you when you were teaching there?
Oh man, I have stories. So before I came to Japan, the dialogue about how foreign workers are treated or women are treated in Japan weren't that huge. You couldn't really find too many articles about it. But I was treated good by some people, treated not so good by other people. And it came down to the fact that I was a woman and because I was the youngest person in the staff room. And I didn't realize this at the time, but I recognized it during my second year, that there is basically like a hierarchy depending on how old you are. And, you know, even like if you're a man or a woman in the staff room. And this wasn't just my personal experience. Like this is just a common thing in Japan I've learned. So if you're a young person in the staff room, you know, I came straight from university, so I was 22. You know, you're treated like you don't know anything and that you're the kohai, and you're constantly asserted that you still don't know everything, even like if you've been there for a while, because it depends on your age. Yeah, like with the younger teachers, I got along with them really well. That's actually how I learned Japanese. In Japan, I think it's dying out now, but we have a traditional thing we do at work called nomikai or enkai. And it's basically like drinking culture. So you go out and drink with your coworkers and party to get along with them and get to know them. And you also exert any stress you have at work to them. So because we were all around the same age group, like we were in our early 20s and mid 20s, like every week, and I think ours was more extreme, but every week we would go out drinking like at the bars downtown and just bond that way. And then at work, it would be like nothing happened, but like we give each other the head nod and we're like, we're ready for Friday night.
Okay, so when I was in high school, you know, I took science classes because I had to, and then I took other classes because I wanted to and where I thought my future might be in. How do the Japanese students look at English class? I mean, do they look at it like, because for me, like biology was like, let me just get through biology and move on to the next subject.
Yeah.
Do they look at English that way, or are they more interested in learning and it becoming something they can use in the future?
I think it depends on the student, but I want to say majority of them see it like biology or math. It's just something they have to do. Another problem is the quality of English education here, especially in the public schools, are quite questionable. When I taught, another thing that surprised me when I was working at the school was that most of the teachers I worked with who were English teachers, they could not speak English. Like
that says a lot for their yeah.
Like they did not understand a word that I was saying. And so I learned Japanese because of immersion. I had to use Japanese. I couldn't rely on English to interact with anyone.
That's one thing I love about Japan is that they don't learn English to make it easier for us. You know, we got to go there and fit in there. So I appreciate that about them.
Yeah, I appreciate that about them as well. But at the same time, it's also reflective on how they prioritize exams over actual education.
Yeah, that's true.
So I met a lot of students at top like elite high schools in like the speech contests. Like they'll have a high Eiken score. Eiken is like the English exam in Japan. But they couldn't utter a word, or they were so hesitant to speak. And that's a problem when you're trying to go abroad or even try to use English at a job in Japan. I also have a lot of adult Japanese friends, and their main reason for learning English, maybe it's to interact with foreigners, but essentially it's to get a promotion at a job. Because they have different exams in Japan. I think also like TESOL, and the higher score the higher score you get, like the higher your bonus will be, basically. So it's just something you have to accomplish to get somewhere here, I think. Yeah.
So when you first moved over there, I mean, may I ask you about your financial situation? I mean, did you earn enough to live comfortably?
Yeah, that's fine. So on the JET program, like, I made pretty good money. It was more than enough for being single and living out in Japan right after graduation. Especially because, I grew up low income. I never I never had that kind of stability before. So I was able to, go to Disneyland and go to concerts and do all kinds of stuff with my money. In the JET program, we have the saying is that with your money, you can only do 2 out of the 3 S's. And so one thing is like traveling around, and the other thing is like socializing, and the other thing is like saving. So you can only do one. So for me, like, I wanted to make the most of living in Japan, so I socialized and I traveled around. So
how did your living? Were you assigned a living place, or did you have to go find your own place to live?
So when I was on the JET program, I was assigned to live in subsidized housing. So the Board of Education owned a building in my area, and my rent was only $100 a month. No lie. Jeez. It was only $100 a month. I know, bro. It was so cheap. Like in DC, it's like $1,000 a month.
You don't want to know what I pay in California.
I don't want to know.
My two bedroom apartment. I'll tell you, my 2-bedroom apartment's $2,000 a month.
That's so expensive. That's a plane ticket.
Yeah, I know. Trust me. Yeah, it's a yeah. I know.
And also, I also noticed that just renting an apartment in Japan is significantly cheaper than the U.S. right now. Like, I live in Osaka, and I live near like the downtown Tennoji area. My rent's only maybe $500.
Wow.
And it's a pretty big apartment, like, I mean, Tokyo is obviously crazy expensive because everybody wants to live in Tokyo, but besides Tokyo, it's pretty cheap to live here compared to the US.
My dream is to live in Yokohama. That's my dream.
Live there. Yokohama's so great. And you could be near the Budokan.
Yeah. All right. So you're teaching in, what happens after your first teaching experience through the JET program? Where do you go after that?
So I was on the JET program for the full 5 years. I was offered to work full time for the high school, but I wanted to get out of Shizuoka because I like being in the city, and I love teaching, but I'd rather teach at a university. Mm-hmm. And since 2016, I've networked with professors in the area, so I had been doing research anyway, and I was more interested in doing research and getting my master's too. I applied to this master's program, but I didn't get the scholarship. So I was trying to figure out what to do. So actually, when I finished the JET program, I was on Hello Work. Hello Work is like unemployment benefits for like maybe 2 or 3 months. And I landed this job at a city hall in Osaka. So I ended up working there for about a year or so. So
how do visas and things like that work for you to stay?
So when I came on the JET program, I had the instructor visa. And when you're a JET, and I believe even when you're Interact, well, it depends on what kind of visa, but I automatically got 3 years anyway. But on the 3rd year, I had to renew it. And when I renewed it, it's actually quite random, like whatever the immigration office gives you. But luckily for me, I had a 3-year extension. So I just stayed on the instructor visa. And when you're on the instructor visa, you have to have a teaching job as well. That's another requirement. And right now I'm in the process of actually switching over my visa from the instructor visa to the student visa. And it's been kind of hectic because of COVID-19. That's really affecting everybody right now with, getting documents in on time and stuff.
I'm sure, yeah.
Yeah.
So you start doing research and working on your master's?
Yeah, so I will enroll in my school and I will start classes on September 1st.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So the gap between working at the school, you said before we got on the air, she ran through her credentials and it went all over my head. So I said, "Hey, I'm just going to introduce you as a researcher and a writer and a teacher, and then you have to fill in the rest of the blanks because I can't remember any of the things you just told me."
Okay, it's a long resume.
You said about ethno something research.
Yes, so since 2016, I've been doing ethnographic research on immigrant communities, minority communities, and mixed race Japanese communities in Japan. And I particularly focus on intercultural communication and intercultural identity. So what all that stuff means is basically I do research on how minorities in Japan navigate their identities here, how they navigate how Japanese they are, and how they communicate with other people in Japan. Because the way Japanese people communicate, not only linguistically, but culturally, is significantly different from other cultures that coexist here. And the place I lived in Hamamatsu, it has one of the highest immigrant populations in Japan, and majority of them are Brazilian Japanese. And there's a long history with how they migrated to Brazil and Japan. And also, when I lived in Hamamatsu, I noticed that people thought I was Brazilian because, obviously, they code white people as American, but if they see someone who's not white, they might not associate them with a Western country. So I would be treated significantly differently compared to, a white ALT or assistant language teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And when I noticed that divide, I wanted to investigate, why that was. And at that time, I was already connected and I was doing research about English education in Japan. But I also wanted to investigate, what kind of dynamic Japanese people had with the minority communities around them. Because in actuality, in the media, you only see a homogenous view of Japan, right? You mostly see Japanese people. But in actuality, there's a ton of Filipino immigrants, Brazilian immigrants, Peruvian, mixed race people living here together. Are
there large mixed race? Because I've been to other countries as well besides Japan, where U.S. military bases had been before, where there's quite a few mixed race children, or they're adults now, but is that the same in Japan, where military installations, where U.S. military installations were at, there's a larger community of mixed race citizens?
Oh yeah, of course. In Okinawa, there's a huge population of mixed race people there. The only thing is that some of these people, they just stay on the base, and when you stay on the base, it's like you're in a different country.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, outside of the base, there's a lot of Peruvian people, but it's not because of the bases. It's because of the 100-year history between Japan and Peru. Basically, hundreds of years ago, there were rumors that there was gold in Peru. And back then, Japan wasn't as wealthy as they are now. And so a lot of Japanese farmers, they migrated to Peru and Brazil to try to find gold and stuff, or to work in farming, because it was a really good industry at the time. And a lot of them made really good money, and they came back to Japan. They bought land in Okinawa and other parts. And a lot of Peruvian people, they have Okinawan heritage as well.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. Yeah, because I've only been to Tokyo and to Yokohama, and I've not noticed a whole lot of mixed race people. I haven't really looked for it. I'm not walking around looking, oh, you're mixed race. I'm not doing that. But the only minorities I really see are the ones the people of African descent in the in Shinjuku, places like that, like the touristy places in Harajuku.
Right. Yeah, I noticed that too. And another thing is like a lot of these mixed race people, like they pass as Japanese.
Mm.
Like in Hamamatsu, for example, like the reason why there's a lot of Filipinos and Brazilian people there is because there's a lot of factories there, and they build the Shinkansen parts and the Toyota like car parts there. And the only way like I could really look at someone and see, aha, you're mixed race or something, is if they have a lot of tattoos or if their fashion was slightly different,
Mm.
because their face is totally Japanese.
Yeah, and do they try to quote unquote hide that they're mixed race as well?
Yeah, I think there's a huge pressure, especially if they always went to Japanese public school. And that's another interesting thing. So even though there's a lot of immigrant communities, they kind of keep to themselves in their own like bubble in a way for protection. So most of the like Brazilian students in Shizuoka and Gunma and other places, they don't attend Japanese public school. They actually attend Brazilian schools and who have branches in Japan. And I've done research about this, and I've interviewed a lot of parents and students about it. And the main concern for the parents was bullying and discrimination, and trying to acculturating into Japanese society is important, but also not being ashamed of who they are. Especially with the high suicide rate in Japan, that was another thing that kept coming up in the interviews. So I think another reason why we might not see them all the time is because they're in their own communities, like in a separate area.
Yeah, it's too bad.
Yeah.
It's I've only gone to Japan as a tourist. I've not lived there, so I have a certain through rose-colored glasses almost. I see Japan, as I hold them very high standard, very high level. Oh,
Yeah.
they're very very polite people, very very this, very that. But I don't really get to see or know the other side of Japan, where the discrimination in things like that happen. It's unfortunate. I mean, it's everywhere, right? But it's unfortunate that they feel they have to stay in their own communities like that.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. Like I remember, as a tourist when I first visited Japan in 2009, I was like, oh my gosh, like they accept me, because I was so worried about that too, actually. Like because I'm not white, and I was the only person in my tour group who wasn't white. I was like, oh, like they'll think I'm Indian or something, or maybe they don't want to talk to me. But actually, I remember for the first time ever, I didn't have to hyphenate my identity in Japan, like when I was on a tour group. Because in America, like I have to constantly say I'm Pakistani American. I can't just say I'm American. But I remember I tried to say this to a Japanese person who worked at a hotel I was at, who asked me where I was from. And I kept saying I was Pakistani American, but they were like, oh, have you lived in Pakistan? I was like, no. And they're like, oh, so you're American. I was like, oh, yeah. That was like a reverse culture. I was like, oh, yeah. But no, like I think, of course, like in most parts of Japan, they're very welcoming to tourists. But I think Chris Wolf even mentioned this in the Vice documentary. They just see you as a visitor. And a lot of times you get asked, when are you going to go home? And there's a lack of awareness of the fact that a lot of non-Japanese people or minority groups see Japan as their home, Mm-hmm. So it's something that needs to be worked on, I think.
Do you think it's improving?
I think it is improving, actually, especially because of the internet. We have like YouTube channels like Asian Boss, which I highly recommend, and they spread awareness based on public interviews. In Japanese schools, they're also starting communities or committees and stuff, so they address certain issues with discrimination for students. But I definitely think there needs to be a more public dialogue in a safe space about this dynamic as well.
What I find so interesting is that when you go to Japan, there's so many people in Japan that are fascinated with American culture. And in America, there's so many people are fascinated with Japanese culture. Right. It's like, let's just trade places for a couple of years, Yeah,
exactly. No, like a lot of my Japanese friends, they're really obsessed with like American culture, even if they don't know any English. Like one of my friends, she's really into old Hollywood, and she's very hardcore about it. Like she even wears like vintage clothes from Kentucky or something from the 1940s.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
you see like the Japanese that are dressed like the cholos here in California, the
Yes.
Mexican gang members and stuff, or the bikers and things like that. And yeah, I just find that quite interesting um how they just fall in love with American culture the same way we do fall in love with the Japanese culture.
Yeah, they really do. And a lot of Japanese fashion and Japanese fashion subcultures, they're inspired from American culture. And when you walk around Japan, no matter where you are, you'll find at least like 5 people wearing stuff with English written on it because it's just considered cool, even
Yeah.
if they don't know what it says. So,
Same with Americans, right? We put tattoos on their bodies. They're not even sure what it says in Japanese.
yeah, same. Chicken soup, chicken noodle soup.
But I'm guessing things like that, the younger culture, where they're becoming more entrenched in the U.S., because of the internet, because of social media, things like that. You see more and more American and westernized things, whatever you want to call it. That hopefully that the doors will open up to being more open to mixed cultures, other cultures. Us all living together in one big world.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
All right, so you were not always a wrestling fan, correct?
Right. I did not get into wrestling until I saw Hana Kimura on Terrace House.
So, what did you think of Hana when you saw her on Terrace House?
Oh man, I remember this very vividly. It was a cold October day. When I first saw Hana, I was just in awe of how cute she was and how alternative she looked. Like, her and I have very similar fashion sense, so I was happy to finally see like a Terrace House member with pink hair. Her pink hair was everything to me. And she was so bubbly and cute and like starry-eyed and bushy-tailed. And she was 22. She just turned 22 when she came on the show, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was her birthday episode, I believe. And seeing her reminded me of me when I came to Japan. Like, she's so excited to experience all these new things as an adult. And I just loved her personality and her fashion sense. I could tell she was really creative and that she was really comfortable with interacting with people from international communities. Even before I read her Shoe Pro interviews, I was like, yeah, I stand from day one.
Did you realize right away that she was biracial?
Kind of. So she was very tan compared to other Japanese people, but also little things like her nose and her mouth. Like, she looks kind of South Asian to me.
Mm-hmm.
So she reminds me of a lot of Japanese people I know, but I could tell she was different from the contemporary like image of a Japanese woman.
Mm-hmm.
But on the very first episode of Terrace House, actually, she does state that her father is Indonesian.
Mm.
So when she said that, I wasn't even surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how was she? I mean, you're on the ground in Japan. The rest of us are reading the internet, which is kind of hit or miss with information.
Right.
How is her mainstream? How was she mainstreamly accepted in Japan on Terrace House?
So in the beginning, I saw a lot of positive comments about her on Twitter. In Japan, the way most people interact with each other is actually on Twitter. Reddit,
SNS.
SNS, yeah, social network, yeah. So most people interact with each other on Twitter about Terrace House, and there's specific hashtags they used to talk about the members, and I was tracking all of them because I'm a fan. And overall, like in the beginning, it was pretty positive. Like, oh, Hana's so cute, Hana's so young, da 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 da. But I noticed that she seemed more popular with like Western audiences or minority audiences compared to like mainstream Japanese audiences, because the members of Terrace House that were more popular than Hana were Vivi. Vivi is this blonde-haired Russian woman who's a model, and Yume, who's this gravure idol like model as well, who's Japanese. So I think because Hana was more contemporary, she wasn't as popular as the other female members, but she was still very popular and recognizable. And you could see that with like her Instagram blowing up and getting a lot of followers and comments. And she started to get more collaborations with famous brands. So like Shibuya 109, she did an ad campaign with them, and she did an interview with El Japan, but for wrestling. So yeah, I think Hana was popular, but not as popular as people keep saying in the English speaking spaces.
Like mainstream popular. Yeah, I fell in love with her 5 years ago when I first saw her wrestle when I was my first trip to Japan.
So jealous you saw her.
I get to meet her a couple times, so she's such a sweetheart. So, I mean, I've told this story before on the podcast, but I'll tell you again. I met her this past September at Kurikan Hall in Tokyo, and I was the last person. She just won the 5-star Grand Prix tournament, and she had signed autographs and taken pictures for like hours and hours, and I was the last person in line. And she took all the time in the world to take pictures with me, to sign anything I wanted, to speak to me in a little bit of English that she knew. And yeah, she was just she was such a sweetheart. And but yeah, I fell in love with her years before that when I got to meet her and see her at other shows. But yeah, that's my last memory of meeting Hana and getting to see her. It was last September, so I'm very, very thankful for that opportunity.
Yeah, like my impression of her was always that she's very genuine and real. And the first time I ever saw a wrestling match was through Terrace House, because they filmed, I think, that match. Mm-hmm. And that was the first match I ever saw. And it was funny because, you know, on Terrace House, like, she was really shy and really cute. Like, there is this basketball player named Ryo, who plays for Yokohama Corsairs, this basketball team. And they had to live together, and obviously like Hana is like very new to dating and stuff after a long time, and every time he would walk by her, or every time like he would like look at her, she would hide behind a pillow or something. And that was my impression of her. Like, she's a shy, awkward person like myself, but like, you know. And so I didn't know what to expect when I would see her on the ring, but I was really excited. And she was so badass at Crooklyn. Like, she came out, she like flipped off people. She's like, I'm here, like, you're going to die. Like, it was so cool. And it was like ultimate like heel energy right there. And it kind of contrasted with what she was like on the show, but you could tell that it was all multifaceted as her as an individual. That's who she really was. Like, she's a little bit of both.
So when the incident went down with her and the roommate and knocking his hat off and things like that, yeah. I mean, what do people watch TV live there, or do they DVR there?
DVR. So this came on Netflix first, so people would watch it on Netflix.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So on Netflix, I mean, when it aired, I mean, was it slowly getting into the social media that this happened, or was like, do people like watch it right away when it comes available?
Oh, they watch it right away. So in Japan, Terrace House comes on every Tuesday, and then after a week they get a break. While in other parts of the world, they don't receive the episodes like live every week. They get them in like a batch of 6 episodes, I want to say every few months.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the rest of the world was way behind. They didn't even see this episode.
So but in Japan, how was it received right away?
People were angry at Hana. They hated her so much. And but then again, like even when you go online, it's hard to determine what the average fan thought, because the average fan just kind of lurks online. They don't post anything. Mm-hmm. So the loudest voices have the most presence. But I want to say overall, people were really hating on Hana, and they were suddenly attacking her femininity and her identity over it, just because she was an angry woman on TV. I tracked the Terrace House Hana tag on Twitter and Instagram, and suddenly there were all these negative comments about her. Like, they were saying that she would commit domestic violence on her partner because she's a wrestler. She doesn't know how to treat a man. They would make fun of that one little scene where she pulls Kai's cap off, and there are like a lot of parodies on TikTok. It was everywhere. It was viral. And it was horrible. I hated it.
Do you know if these were men or women online putting these, or a mixture of both?
Most of them are men.
Mm.
Even if they were anonymous, like because linguistically, like in Japanese, men and women have different ways of speaking at times.
Mm-hmm.
So I could tell most of them were definitely men.
Is it just because a woman didn't act like the traditional woman? She's act like it blows my mind to think that way. But
Because in my opinion, I think she was just a punching bag for people. Like they just wanted to watch Terrace House to find someone to pick on. And unfortunately, Hana was it. Because besides Hana, there were other female members who were also cyberbullied on Twitter in Japan.
mm.
But I think Hana got the worst of it because she was very contemporary compared to the other members. Like she was the nail that stuck out.
Easier target, yeah.
Yeah.
That's too bad.
And,
so,
yeah. Oh, so yeah, when I watched the episode, I thought it was weird. She had a very 180 personality. Like she would say "teme yaro" and like she would suddenly speak very differently to Kai in Japanese. So I thought she was acting. Like I could tell it was very staged anyway.
And in fact, we find out later on that it probably was.
Yeah, I don't know what the truth is anymore.
Yeah, who knows, right?
Yeah.
This wrestler Lance Storm, he used to do a reality show at his wrestling school in Canada, and he once said that it's a reality show, it's not a documentary. So when he talked about his show, that they staged some things, because it made for good TV. So
right.
Terrace House is a reality show, it's not a documentary. So I'm of the belief that some things were scripted or pushed along or helped along in escalated things more than it would have naturally or organically.
Yeah, like my impression of Terrace House, because I've been watching Terrace House for about 2 or 3 years now. And there was a season before this called Opening New Doors, and that was the first time I ever watched Terrace House. And Opening New Doors seemed mostly wholesome, and what got me into it was how slice of life it really was. Because when you break it down, like a lot of people's personalities on the show, they're kind of tropes in Japan, even shachos. And in the beginning, like I thought it was pretty wholesome for the most part, but at the same time, it was more slice of life. And there'd be certain like episodes where it was obviously outlandish compared to the flow of the conversations they were having, that it seemed obviously staged to me. And those are the ones that are cringy. I hated those episodes. So it seemed very formulaic, especially this year. I don't know why. I think it was because of Fuji Television's, like, they wanted more television ratings, and their ratings have been going down for many years now.
Do you know if they're familiar with, like, The Real World and Road Rules and Big Brother and stuff over in Japan?
Probably not. I don't think they were, and I don't even think Fuji Television even considered what the international audience thought. I think they were more focused on the numbers and like the television ratings they were getting in Japan, even though they collaborated with Netflix.
Yeah, because the reason I ask is because like the first, I've been watching I watched The Real World since the first season. I'm an older guy, so. But the first season it seemed more natural, and then as seasons went along, it seemed like people were going on for an agenda. They had agendas to go on there to become famous or what have you. And I'm wondering if the same thing was happening for Terrace House. Was that initially people came on for wholesome reasons, in pure reasons, but now that certain people came on, or that the TV station themselves or the show itself had other ideas of like maybe crossing some of their people over to being stars on their network or what have you.
So I think Terrace House always had that kind of reputation where it's meant as a gateway for you to become famous or to become a famous model or actor and to pave the way in the entertainment industry. So it was kind of step you had to take. I noticed that especially like in the beginning of every episode of Terrace House, they always claim that there's no script. And most Japanese people I know, they're like, oh, that's total BS. Like, of course, there's some like fabrication behind this. And even when you watch the show firsthand, most of the members are models and actors. And even Hana herself, she had a significant amount of like modeling experience and acting experience, and TV appearances with Awaniko when she was in that girl group in Okinawa. So I think it was obviously like seen as a show meant for people who wanted to enter the entertainment industry.
I'm going to ask you a weird question you may not have the answer to, but the translation that's done from Japanese to English for Western fans, does Fuji TV do the translation, or do you know if somebody else does?
I'm not entirely sure. It depends on the document. I think it would either be Fuji TV, Far East Entertainment, or Netflix.
Because having read translations, having used interpreters and stuff, I mean, there's ways to twist, not say twist words, but to get your agenda across through translation. If you want to, you can take some liberties with it sometimes. So I'm wondering if maybe they took liberties with some of the English translations over here to push an agenda.
You mean the subtitles?
The subtitle, yeah. I'm sorry, yeah.
Sorry, it's okay. I was like, wait, what? Are you in the articles? It's okay. So subtitles are handled by Netflix.
Okay.
And I believe they hire people to do them. Like at the end of every episode, at least in Japan, they credit who did the subtitles.
Okay.
I would watch them. Sometimes I would watch them with people with English subtitles because of the Japanese, and I think overall the subtitles were correct.
Okay,
actually,
good.
Very good. The only inconsistencies I found was like some cultural things or cultural nuances would get lost in translation, or some references. So I remember one episode, the members or the panelists were talking about going to Fuji Q. Fuji Q is a very famous amusement park in Japan. It's in Yamanashi. It's near Mount Fuji.
Oh, it's that big one you'd be passing the train going that way?
Yeah. Yes, and it has a big roller coaster. It has the biggest haunted house in Japan. Super cool. And they said they wanted to go to Fuji Q, but the subtitle said, "I want to go to Disneyland." Instead. And I was like, what the heck? Like, why didn't they just write Fuji Q? So that was the most inconsistent thing I found on the subtitle. But the subtitles were overall pretty accurate.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. So you're following Hana on social media, obviously, and it was daytime here when she started posting the tweets before she passed away. Were you able to follow those in real time, or were you in bed already?
I was asleep.
Yeah.
It was 3 a.m. in Japan.
Yeah.
And even then, I didn't know about it until 1 or 2 p.m. in Japan, like 12 hours later. And that was because I had to work that day, and I didn't even go online, ironically. So I remember I finished work, and I opened up my phone, and I'm in a group chat with all my Japanese friends, and we're all Terrace House fans. And one of my friends, she sent me a Japanese link that the title is Hana Kimura is dead, causes unknown. And this is from Tokyo Sports or something. And I was really shocked. And, I was really confused. And at first, there were a lot of rumors going around. Like I remember someone saying that it was because of COVID-19. And this was during the state of emergency. But that didn't even make sense because 3 days before, I watched her do a live stream with Stardom on YouTube. So I knew that was it. And then I remembered, I believe it was May 1st, she did a live stream and she was cooking ratatouille. And she was talking to Konami, I believe. And at one point, she puts her hand on her waist and you can see her in her wrists and there's cuts on them.
Yeah.
And I think it's still on their channel. And of course, like when I saw that live, in early May, I thought I was seeing things, because I'm looking at it on my phone. I'm like, why are there lines on her wrist? Maybe I'm just imagining things, But that was one of the first things I thought of when I saw that article about her passing away.
For me, it was happening in real time. I was sitting at my desk and work, and people were messaging me saying, "Hey, have you seen these? Have you seen these? Have you seen these?"
Yeah.
And they're like, "Can you reach out to somebody?" I'm like, I don't know a whole lot of people to reach out to in Japan. So I did reach out to Fumi Saito, who's a journalist over there in Japan, and he got on it right away. I woke him up. He told me I woke him up. but it's he didn't mind me waking him up, but
Yeah.
it was happening in real time for us here in the U.S. and everybody's hearts were breaking. Everybody was terrified of what was going on.
Yeah, it was so terrifying. And I remember I was trying to figure out like how she passed away, and I was suspicious that that was the case. So I Googled it, and I found so many screenshots, a lot of them were uncensored, of her final tweets and Instagram posts.
Yeah.
And it just broke my heart. Like, I had no idea she was going through that much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after the news came out, after what happened, what was the media response? What was the public's response in Japan when that news broke?
So, well, for one, a lot of people suddenly knew who she was. Like,
Mhm.
oh, like Hana Kimura. Like, suddenly, like, the only time you see her in mainstream media is for something when she's dead, you know?
Yeah.
And her mom, Kyoko Kimura, like, is suddenly in the spotlight, because of the interviews, or obviously because she's her mom. And I want to say, in terms of like mainstream responses, everyone was just focusing on the cyberbullying aspect of it. They weren't talking about mental health care.
Mm-hmm.
So,
in the people, just the general public, the Terrace House fans, how did they respond? Were they supportive? I mean, I'm sure they were all heartbroken, but
yeah.
what was the response? But with your friends, let's start with them. Just what was their response when she passed away?
I think we were just shocked. Like, it seems so sudden to us. And also, this is during the state of emergency in Japan, so everyone is like social distancing and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So we really empathize with Hana because, Hana was probably like us in the sense that she was physically isolated. She was earning a lot less money because she didn't have any matches anymore. And she couldn't do the things like that would have maybe like helped ease the pain with interacting with people because of the social distancing. And yeah, like we were just really upset by what happened. And it was more of a discussion about, again, like cyberbullying and the impacts of it, and also the impacts of COVID-19 on this whole situation as well.
So in general, is cyberbullying an issue in Japan?
Oh, it's a huge issue in Japan. Even at the high school I work at, like every week there would always be a meeting about like some like student getting harassed on Instagram, and that's only the stuff that was been reported to us. But yeah, I think cyberbullying is a global issue as well, but also mental health care. And mental health care in Japan is much less accessible compared to other GDPs like the United States and Australia.
Why do you think that is?
That's a good question. I think there's this huge cultural phenomenon of hone and tatemae. So hone is like home face. It's like how you express your true emotions to yourself. And then tatemae is like your outside face, the way you express yourself to other people outwardly. So I think because there's such a pressure to not only like hide your true feelings in terms of like mental health care, but also in other aspects in a high context society where you don't even confront people directly when you're arguing with someone. I want to say that's why there's a stigma with mental health care. And also in terms of like with other Asian countries too, like even South Asian countries, like mental health care is often introduced by Western countries as well. So linguistically in Japanese, even when you're trying to describe things like self-harm and stuff, these words are loan words from English. There's no like original Japanese words for what's going on in your mind. So for example, trauma, you say torauma in Japanese. Or self-harm is like ristokato, which literally means like wrist cutting in Japanese. So there's a limitation linguistically as well on how you even describe that phenomenon too. So I think it's a lack of exposure and a lack of awareness.
Can you talk about suicide in Japan? About how it's so prevalent and how it's viewed in Japan, how suicide is viewed?
Suicide is extremely common in Japan, and it is extremely heartbreaking, but it's something that happens extremely often. I think even more often than when I ever lived in the States, especially in the big cities like Tokyo. I remember when I was on the JET program, every few weeks I would go to Tokyo to do research, and I would stay in Tokyo during the week as well as the weekends. And no matter what train line I took, there was always an announcement saying that somebody has jumped in front of the train.
Mm-hmm.
And that the trains are delayed. And usually in Japan, trains always come on time.
Mm-hmm.
And they will apologize even if they're a minute late. But the only times when the trains will come late is if there was an accident, like someone jumping in front of a train.
That happened when I was there in March as well.
Yeah, like it's like the weather. It's always happening. And there's a lot of subcultures in Japan that address that as well to help people like have an outlet for it or for mental health care as well. There's a subculture called Yami Kawaii. So it's like a kawaii like fashion subculture, but the images and messages they use show suicidal thoughts and depressive thoughts. So there's images of syringes and nooses and saying like death, using the kanji for death and stuff. And yeah, I think in terms of suicide, it's extremely common. And I want to say in the art and entertainment industry with anime and stuff, you can easily find resources where characters will express those kinds of thoughts. But in real life, people have a hard time expressing what they're actually going through. And it's because of the stigma behind mental health and the lack of accessibility to counseling.
So the counseling after a loved one commits suicide, I'm sure that's lacking as well.
Oh, it's very, very lacking. Like Japanese health insurance is great, but it does not cover any mental health care unless if it's maybe psychiatry, like for medication. Mm-hmm. So
one thing, I don't know if this is related or not, or if it's showing some improvement, but when I went to Japan for the first time, 4 or 5 years ago, whenever it was now, I do a lot of volunteer work with people with special needs. And 5 years ago when I went, I didn't see a single person with special needs on the street. Yeah. But this last September and last March when I was there, I saw many more people with special needs, with Down syndrome, things like that, on the streets with their family members and people walking around, proudly and taking them to stores and whatever, just, going out and doing just stuff in general public. So I'm hoping maybe more, my dream, my hope, I guess, is that maybe people not being quote unquote normal or, right or whatever you want to pick the wrong word is, for normal people. Yeah, that they'll become more accepting of people that aren't quote unquote normal. And mental health is part of that.
I agree. Like I wish people who are not neurotypical had more of a presence or more of comfort living here. I know that Kyoko Kimura, she really wants to start a nonprofit for cyberbullying, but I also think that she and Kai Kobayashi, they might also focus on mental health care as well, because I know Kai is a huge advocate for mental health care, especially in Japan.
So how did you get involved in the news aspect of this? How did you get involved in being part of the media in the story?
Well, it was basically through all my translations. It went viral apparently, and I didn't realize how viral it got. So I remember I kept seeing those Bunshin articles about Kyoko Kimura's 10-hour interview. And I waited a couple of days because I assumed, that international media outlets would pick this up, at least the wrestling ones, But no one picked it up, and I thought that was really crucial news. And I just really wanted other fans to know the truth, because I felt that, knowing the truth and having this kind of closure will help us heal together from this tragedy. So I first posted these things, I think, in early July on Twitter, but also I translated Hana's suicide notes, her online suicide notes,
Mm-hmm.
back in May. Like the day after she passed away, I posted it because nobody else was translating it.
It's funny because I asked one of my friends, I DM'd him saying, "Hey, have you read the translations?" He's like, "Farrahs?" I'm like, "Yes."
Yeah, and obviously, like, I did this on Twitter, so I noticed on Twitter it was only maybe like a couple hundred, then a couple thousand, so I was like, okay, it's no big deal. But then I would get recognized in public. Like, I would go out into Osaka, and like I have pink hair, so I'm very conspicuous, obviously. But like people would come up to me, even in the immigration office, and they're like, "Are you Farrah? Are you the Hana Kimura translator person?" And I was like, "Yes." Like even random people like who I had mutual friends with, they would want to meet me, and they would tell me that they saw my translations on Reddit or Facebook or something. Like people were sharing them everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And because it went super viral on all these platforms, like I would get contacted like on different social media platforms I was on to do interviews and stuff like that. So my translations brought me to the media, and I'm quite proud of what I've been doing. And I'm really happy that, everyone can get together and support Hana. And that was my main goal. I wanted everyone to have access to this like hardcore information.
Yeah, we're pretty like-minded. That's the reason I started the podcast too, was to let people know about the women that wrestle over in Japan. Let Westerners, English speakers know about it, because what I'm learning is like half the stuff. Not I won't say half the stuff. The third of the stuff on Wikipedia is not true about them. As I interview them and talk to them. So it was my goal for this podcast was to offer an outlet for getting the right information out, but also humanizing the wrestlers, and kind of bridging the gap between the Japanese speaking and the English speaking.
Yeah, of course. That was also the main reason why I translated, because there's a huge difference between reading an article and simply observing some summary someone made, especially someone who has no background in wrestling or knowing anything about Hana Kimura, and reading them verbatim firsthand on what she actually said. Trying to give justice and trying to spread like the actual truth of what they actually said, to give them support too.
And Google Translate's a very interesting thing if you try to use Google Translate.
Jungle screaming woman.
I've had to learn because I don't have anybody that helps me get guests on my show. I have to like go out and do it myself. So I've found ways to like use Google Translate, translate it to English, and then translate it back to Japanese to make it make sense. I have a whole program down now what I do to have it make sense to when I send requests to the wrestlers to do interviews and stuff. So, and I'm sure it still doesn't half make sense when I send it over, but they humor me and respond to me. So.
Oh my God, dude. Yeah, I can write you a template so you can just send it out.
I appreciate that. I need that. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Because what Google Translate does, but I think the wrestlers are aware of it, like they know. Is that they'll translate things in like casual Japanese, which is it's very rude in Japanese to do. Like, because in Japanese we have all these formalities, and the formal language is called keigo. So, for example, like in Japanese, like when you translate something directly from English, because we say the word "you" a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes when you're using the automatic translators, there's like different ways to say "you" in Japanese, and they each have a different meaning. So there's anata, which is direct, but like you're not supposed to say use. They don't use pronouns too much in Japanese. And then there's kimi, which implies that you have a very close relationship, and it's often intimate. And then there's omae, and omae is very, very rude. It just means like, hey, you with the face. Like, it's that kind of nuance. So there's so many different nuances with the word you alone in Japanese. I can only imagine what the Google translators might have come up with.
That's what I had to learn. I had to learn to stop using he, she, you, things like that. I had to just like keep using names. Like Eric would like this. Eric was asking for this. Pick the wrestler's name. I would put their name in like 8 times on the message, not like putting you or he or she or anything like that.
Yeah, no. Like in Japanese, when you send a request, and I had to do this a lot when I worked at City Hall. I had to always make a polite greeting and be like, I'm sorry, like the literal translation, and we don't do this in English, but it's a cultural thing. Like you say, like, sorry for bothering you with this message. I hope you have the time to do this. I am this. Like, can you please do this? I will be ultimately grateful if you do this. Sign. You know, there's a different like formality when it comes to that.
Every single message I send at the end, I put, I apologize if my grammar is poor. I'm using Google Translate.
Oh, okay. They're probably like, yeah, I can see that. But I'm sure they're really happy to be interviewed internationally too.
Some are, some aren't. Yeah, so it's pretty interesting to see that, you know. But I've broke through with the trust. The trust was hard to get through at first, but I've broken through with some people with that. And me going to Japan this past March to do some interviews, I think kind of broke through for me a little bit too, which was nice.
Right? Like, I think the moment I felt that I was really trusted by the community was when, like, you started following me and Kyoko Kimura started following me on Twitter. I literally screamed in the train station.
Me?
Well, because, like, okay, I was wearing a mask, luckily. I was like, oh my gosh! But I thought it was a role play account at first because like, people with like profile pictures of like Kyona and Hana and stuff, like they were following me, and I was like, obviously it's not them. And I was like, why would someone role play Kyoko Kimura? Because like she's retired, right? Like what's going on? And then I click on it and I'm like, oh no, that's her. That's her. Yeah. That is Senpai. Senpai notices me.
Yeah. Yeah, Bull, my claim to fame, this is why I tell everybody, like Bull Nakano follows like 70 people on Twitter, and Bull Nakano follows me.
Oh, yeah.
That's my most proud moment of my my podcasting career.
Right? Like, that's what I love about social media. You get noticed by Senpai.
Yeah. So part of your resume right now is working with the Japan Times. What do you do for them?
So I write under the community section. I'm a freelance writer for them. So I mostly write about different experiences in the community. So, for example, my very first article for the Japan Times in 2018 was about discrimination that Brazilian Japanese people experience in Shizuoka. And there was this one event that Hamamatsu City Hall kind of sponsored. It was called Gaijin Day. And Gaijin means foreigner in Japanese or outsider. But they called it Gaijin Day, but the performers and everyone were mixed race Japanese people who have lived in Japan for generations. And so I write articles about basically issues and experiences that minority communities have in Japan.
Mm.
Yeah.
And you talked about like with social influencers as well. You do some work with them as well.
Yeah, so often I'll reach out to social media influencers like Instagrammers or YouTubers, and I talk about, how they navigate Japanese culture and express that through social media, as well as like, because they're sharing images of Japan to the outside world, because a lot of these people, like their followers, are very curious about Japan. And they're kind of they're ambassadors, basically. And they make it so much more accessible for people outside of Japan to see what it's actually like. So, yeah, I reach out to anyone who has a huge following and has really made a difference in showing what Japan is like.
See, that horrifies me that Japanese people watch the American influencers sometimes. It's like,
right?
We're not like that. We're not like that. I swear, we're not like that.
Right, like, because especially with the Americans, you have to be careful because of the stereotypes.
But like the Americans that go to Japan too, sometimes are just completely embarrassing as well.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Farrah, I thank you for your time. Where can we find you on social media?
Yeah, so I am Farrah Hakase, FARRAHAKASE on Twitter and Instagram.
And again, everybody should follow her. I've put this on the shows before. I've put this on tweets before. She's a must follow. She's a wrestling fan now. And the next time I'm in Japan, if they ever let me back in, she's one of the people I'm going to look up, and we're going to go to a wrestling show together.
Oh, we are. And I will continue to post thirsty tweets about Kota Ibushi.
I've met him before. He's a nice guy.
Oh, you're so lucky. lucky. I need to be him. We have to be him next time.
You can talk to your dream boys, and then you can help me flirt with my dream girls.
I am more than happy to do that. We will do the wingman thing.
Farrah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.